Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. If you're a huge fan of Soul Train and you've closely watched each episode, this is for you. I recall those intense performances and moments that will never be forgotten. Have you ever watched the notorious Soul Train scene? How hard did producers try to hide? Perhaps you saw it, but did you notice what actually transpired behind the scenes? Now let's discuss one of the most contentious scenes in the program's history and try to identify what they hoped you would miss. You are aware. What aspects of Soul Train did people enjoy the most? It was authentic. Wherever you were from, or the state of your life at the time, everything stopped when Soul Train started playing. The dancing, the music, the style. It felt alive. It made no difference if you were seeing from a small flat or the living room is packed. The instant that, when the theme tune came on, you felt as though you were a component of a larger whole. Additionally, if you were among the children who were unable to wait to perform the dance steps you witnessed, the screen, then you are fully aware of what cruel. Founded by Don Cornelius in 1970, Soul Train evolved beyond a television show. Display. It developed into a movement, one moment at a time, when it was difficult for black artists to be noticed. This program on national television provided the attention they were due. If you James, you witnessed the legends, Stevie Wonder, Arthur Franklin, Brown, Marvin Gaye as well. They weren't on the side either. Takes action. They took center stage, regarded as the celebrities they were. That had significance, not only for the performers, but to the millions of others that watch at home, who has never encountered anyone who seemed to receive that type of affection and deference on television. Not to mention the dancers. Their background wasn't extras. They were the focal point of the performance. Their enthusiasm was infectious. If you ever attempted to replicate those actions in your daily life, donning socks, or rapping, you weren't alone over furniture. Everywhere, people were acting in the same way. Something. Not only was the Soul Train line a dance, it was a liberating moment. You didn't have to be well known or wealthy. You simply required rhythm and the bravery to glow. However, Soul Train went above and beyond amuse yourself. The culture was altered. What people wore on the show turned into in the streets people wore. From from platform shoes to bell-bottoms, sunglasses and sequins, the show shaped how individuals communicated. It was bright, vibrant, and self-assured. It made fashion, not the other way around. Additionally, that influence was not limited to black people. Communities. Everyone was observing, everyone was imitating. That's the type of this show had strength. Let's chat now. Regarding Don Cornelius, he was not noisy. He wasn't required. His presence was cool, collected, and driven. He had a vision. He desired to display black culture in a stunning manner and powerful. In an era when the press was filled with unfavorable stereotypes, he provided the world from a new perspective. He displayed talent, excitement, and pride. He demonstrated blackness wasn't anything to conceal. There was cause for celebration. Cornelius meticulously managed the performance since he was aware of its significance. He didn't allow things to become chaotic. He produced sure it maintained focus. For this reason, people had faith in it. They were aware of what they were receiving on Saturday mornings. Real dancing, nice music, and something it was like home. For a lot of Soul Train became a weekly show for families, custom. Together, you watched it and danced. Together, and shared a laugh. It made people happy in the midst of difficult periods, and for that reason, it is still important. Years later, people still discuss it, like though it never gone, because, in a sense, didn't. Doors were opened by Soul Train. It improved our mood and provided us with something to take pride in. If you had it growing up, it is a component of your narrative. Additionally, even if you found it later, the tranquility, love, and spirit continued to strike. However, to your surprise, things weren't as happy as they seemed. As it seemed, Behind the fluid motions, with radiant grins, there were unspoken narratives and troubling scenes captured by the cameras, failed to appear, and the creators hoped you would never learn. You were always aware of the energetic dancers on Soul Train, radiant, with self-assurance, and acting like stars. However, what you failed to notice was that the price of that glow, outside of the camera, a lot. The same dancers were having difficulties. They played a crucial role in the charm of the presentation. However, they received little or no compensation. For others, they only got a boxed lunch and the prospect of publicity. For young people who aspire to gain attention, it felt like a tremendous promise. However, when the lights darkened and the music stopped, they returned home exhausted, frequently in debt, and occasionally questioning whether it was all worthwhile it. Something really unjust was going on regarding it. These dancers lived up each and every episode. They weren't merely. They were the beating heart in the background. Viewers weren't only drawn to the show because of the vocalists. They watched to find out who would. What if you danced down the Soul Train line? Their movements and the clothes they would wear. They would dress up. These children were establishing national patterns. However, the show. They did not provide them with a fair share of the limelight. There, although the recognition was genuine, the passion was constrained. For many, watching television was sufficient initially, but eventually, the lack of assistance and compensation started to take them out. Then there were the portions that were manipulated. Perhaps you recall the Soul Train Scramble Board. An entertaining small dancer's task was to unjumble the names of well-known performers. It appeared impulsive and foolish, yet in accordance with a number of previous participants, it wasn't all that genuine. The board was frequently predetermined or carefully supervised to make. I'm positive nobody made a mistake on air. Manufacturers didn't want to deal with the stress of life errors, hence, they subtly influenced the match. At-home viewers had no notion. They believed it to be true. They cheered when a correct guess was made. However, actually, it wasn't always an even level playing field. Additionally, for competitors who didn't remove that camera assistance, it was annoying. They departed with a sense of while some were ashamed or deceived, others gave an advantage in a discreet manner. That kind trust is eroded by this. Episodes weren't shot once every 7 days. Rather, dancers were requested to record many episodes consecutively, frequently over extended weekends. This required arriving early, staying on stage, and dancing all day till the end of the night. All of this was completed with minimal food and no actual pauses, and no more compensation. Additionally, if you didn't bring enough clothes for several episodes, you can be left or sent home. Out of important parts. The strain was steady. You needed to act, grin, and give it your all each and every minute, even when you were worn out. A few dancers have come forward to say they were hesitant to voice complaints. They sensed interchangeable. If you made too many requests or appeared overly worn out, there was always someone else is waiting to replace you. Many were silent because of that dread. Additionally, it maintained them trapped in a loop in which they were praised on television, but forgotten when the cameras ceased to record. Their difficult work influenced the culture of the country, but was frequently written off as merely a component of the performance. In retrospect, Soul Train brought so much happiness to the world. It swung opened doors for artists of color and established a room for fashion, independence, and expression. However, that doesn't imply it was flawless in every way. Behind the sparkle were genuine donors. All of their possessions. Frequently, without being genuinely observed or encouraged. Their narratives are equally important as the songs and dances that we can still recall. Since the truth is that if those dancers weren't there would not a Soul Train. Other than these gloomy, actually, there was one notorious scene. The makers made a concerted effort to hide, armaments so startling that it was concealed from the public view. How come it wasn't shown? And what actually took place? You're going to discover, and believe me, you'll be startled. Among the most notorious and Soul Train's contentious moments, October 1980 was a historic month with Rick James, which was really contentious that producers attempted to bury it deep. Well known for his captivating stage presence, and Rick James's rebellious demeanor had established a track record of pushing limits. As soon as he entered, the fans anticipated a Soul Train performance, a performance to remember. What they got, though, was something much more what anyone had expected. As soon as James began his performance, the enthusiasm was indisputable. He started his performance with the distinctively intense atmosphere that made He's a Star. He was in his element, consuming the energy of the crowd and putting all of his energy into the performance. However, as the song went on, James made a move that astounded the viewers as well as the people in front of the cameras. He started interacting directly with the audience, departing from the performance's standard format. Rick James, always the showman, unrestrained by outrageous dancing steps, entertaining the crowd and giving them the impression that they were a part of the encounter. He made a move toward the limits of what was deemed suitable for Soul Train. The program had always took delight in serving as a platform that honored black culture. Nevertheless, it additionally functioned with a considerable degree of civility and deference. James's actions, however, it appeared to contradict that benchmark. His exchanges weren't only audacious, but occasionally overtly provocative, establishing a situation that was far more daring than what Soul Train had previously broadcast. The untamed vitality and physique of his performance weren't merely a demonstration of musical prowess, but an assessment of the performance's boundaries. The audience was enthralled and captured up in all he did, but the time was quickly rising over what the Don Cornelius and the producers had intended for the program. It was uncooked, free, and possibly too much for the meticulously constructed image of Soul Train had put a lot of effort into building. As the show had always served as a free platform, black people's celebration and expressiveness. This time, culture was different. It pushed the limits of appropriate behavior in a manner that made them wonder just how far could the show go in its quest of genuineness. It wasn't merely a performance, it was a declaration. James was not planning to follow any regulations or standards. He was present to make his own declaration, one that was almost as wild and disobedient as his music. This scene, in its uncut anarchy, endures in the recollections of people who saw it. It was a striking departure from the typical Soul Train formula and a clear illustration of the dangers associated with live television. Despite the fact that the performance was crazy, and it was a moment that shook and was unforgettable. The basis for the program. For some, it became a representation of pushing boundaries. Others saw it as a warning about what may occur if such boundaries were too much testing. You must be considering what was the reaction of the producers. Let's simply say that they swiftly discovered they had a serious issue on their palms. However, what did they do for harm prevention? The response will be unexpected. The prompt reaction, as per came from nothing to those who were present, besides the visionary Don Cornelius behind Soul Train. He wasn't a bashful person, away from difficult choices. Additionally, when Rick James went too far in his Don was careful to intervene during the performance. Don reportedly interrupted the conversation with, "This ain't bandstand," he said sharply. The language was straightforward and uncompromising. A note to Rick James, as well as the group, that Soul Train was no ordinary musical performance. It had a distinct vision, a benchmark to maintain. Additionally, it was going to be honored. Here's the comment wasn't only meant to stop James in his tracks. It involved sketching a distinct line in the sand, indicating Soul Train's purpose was to commemorate black culture that is dignified rather than chaotic or dispute. Following the event, the creators hurried to determine the best course of action. The primary question at hand was whether to broadcast Rick's entire unedited footage James's performance. By doing this, it would have been a danger that might cause resentment certain viewers and harm the program's reputation. However, deleting the video as well, much would drain the vitality and Soul Train's reputation for genuineness. Thus, following considerable consideration, important parts of the performance were removed, and the show was broadcast with little fanfare. The creators' goal was for the revised version to omit the contentious parts. However, they realized they had lost when they did so. A portion of Soul's unadulterated live magic, Take a Train, represented. In private, additionally, producers began to tighten up their rules for content. The event Rick James acted as a wake-up call, phone call, demonstrating that even the largest stars might overstep their bounds. To avoid such disturbances in the future, more stringent system of oversight was established. Dancers, as well as performers, received more detailed rules, as well as the producers of the show were increasingly wary of permitting unfettered form performances. There was an obvious change to regulate what was observed, something that wasn't on the screen of the rambunctious early years of Soul Train. Concurrently, the producers' worked public relations management is challenging. Fallout. Official declarations were hastily drafted, minimizing the occurrence and concentrating on the show's dedication to the accurate portrayal of Black culture. In these assertions, they highlighted the fact that Soul Train had always aimed to serve as a forum for inspirational and honoring the skills of Black people. They presented the event as a singular incident, a unique instance that didn't capture the genuine essence of the program, that the intention was to comfort both supporters and those who criticized Soul Train for continue being a respectable place for Black brilliance and originality in spite of the dispute pertaining to that specific episode. Long-term, the consequences of the incident involving Rick James had a long-lasting influence on Soul Train's course. It prompted a reassessment of the program's content guidelines and a more thoughtful method of living performances. Even so, the enthusiasm and the unpredictable nature of Soul Train understood to have persisted. The manufacturers got far more picky about what they let the air out. They had to attack, striking a compromise between preserving the show's genuineness and making sure it remained within the parameters of the public anticipations. This was a pivotal moment for Soul Train. Point, an instance that put its values to the test, its reputation and dedication to presenting Black culture in a favorable light illumination. When Soul Train first aired, has already amassed a devoted following, for the program had been a mainstay of Black music and culture, providing a venue for artists to display their skills in front of a countrywide audience. Those that were interested in the music, the fashion, and the exuberant dancing steps it contributed to Soul Train's fame. Thus, when Rick James took the stage, his distinctive charm and unrepentant energy, it was the type of show that people had become accustomed to it. But as the concert descended into anarchy, unusual events occurred behind the scenes, which the general public may not have been able to observe right away. A large number of viewers, particularly those who the show is accustomed, it might not have observed that the show wasn't as full as it appeared. For individuals who are concentrating more on the music and energy, it's possible that the cuts went under the radar. Ultimately, the Soul Train experience involved more than just sensing the music, as it was all about adhering to each one specific aspect of what was taking place on screen. The editing crew for the show did a well done in reducing the disturbance brought forth by the event, making sure that the energy level of the performance looked tremendous and captivating, yet less unvarnished, and more erratic than initially intended. Nevertheless, for a more focused audience, something could not have felt quite right. Long-time viewers of Soul Train who were used to uninterrupted performances were able to perceive this. This specific segment was unique. Perhaps it was either the suddenness of the stitches or the strange tempo. However, there was a gap. It could have been a subtle one for some. Sensation that didn't register right away as inappropriate. However, for others, particularly those who were acquainted with Rick James's vivacious, raw style, the incomplete performance was glaring. Perhaps they were abandoned, pondering the fate of the performance. However, what was evident even at that time, what had Soul Train just gone through, among the most erratic and contentious periods in its past. And the long-term effects of its performance would have a profound impact outside of cuts produced for the broadcast. Soul Train's legacy is much more than a brief cultural overview of the 70s and 80s It's a lasting emblem of black fashion, music, and fashion, one that still has resonance even decades after the program's premiere last episode. In spite of the disputes and the hardships that go on behind the scenes, Soul Train is a famous figure in the history of American television, influencing how we observe the impact of black culture. About today's entertainment sector. When considering Soul Train, probably the first thing that springs to mind is the enduring melody, the renowned performances, as well as the thrilling dancing moves. The program was the beating heart of black music, providing a stage for musicians to demonstrate their abilities in a manner that was revolutionary in its day. However, soul, there was more to Train than just the music. It had to do with standing up for black people, culture with honor and pride. It was regarding providing black entertainers with the opportunity to appear on national television without being required to follow the stereotypes that were frequently projected onto them in the media. Even though it addressed disputes, Soul Train continued to advance, leaving a permanent impression on the entertainment, the world. The program created opportunities for the future. Black performers, dancers, and artists, black culture was shown to be something that required hydration or conform to societal norms. The program was unreservedly genuine, and that what made it so was its authenticity, strong. The vision of Don Cornelius was easy, to establish a forum where black culture could be honored without make a compromise. And that idea came to pass, even when faced with obstacles and disputes. In conversations with former many Soul Tra